First of all, let me just say to everyone, good morning.
Good morning.
And I want to thank each of you for joining. Before I offer opening remarks and by way of introduction, I'm Mark Morial, proud to serve as President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Urban League. I want to begin with Amy and just ask each of you to introduce yourself and your organizational affiliation. Turn your mic on, and after you speak, turn your mic off. We'll go all the way around. I'll offer some brief opening remarks, and then we'll get into our conversation. So thanks to all for joining. Amy.
I am Amy Spitalnik, CEO of the Jewish Council for Public Affairs.
I'm Kimberly Crenshaw, Executive Director of the African American Policy Forum, Professor of Law at Columbia and UCLA Law Schools.
Good morning, Damon Hewitt, President and Executive Director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under Law.
Good morning, Brenda Victoria Castillo, President and CEO of the National Hispanic Media Coalition.
Good morning, Samantha Tweedy, CEO of the Black Economic Alliance Foundation.
Good morning, Alfonso David, civil rights lawyer and president and CEO of the Global Black Economic Forum.
Good morning, Margaret Huang, President and CEO of the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Good morning, I'm Sheila Katz, CEO of National Council of Jewish Women.
Good morning, Siobhan Arline Bradley, President and CEO of NCNW, the National Council of Negro Women.
Good morning, Janae Nelson, President and Director Counsel of the Legal Defense Fund.
Good morning, Virginia K. Solaman, President and CEO of Common Cause.
Good morning and buenos dias. My name is Juan Proño, the CEO of LULAC.
Good morning, Maya Berry. I'm the Executive Director of the Arab American Institute.
Good morning, everybody. Greg Orton, the National Director of the National Council of Asian Pacific Americans.
Good morning, Kelly Robinson, President of the Human Rights Campaign Foundation.
Good morning, Fatima Goss-Graves, President and CEO of the National Women's Law Center.
Good morning, Derek Johnson, President and CEO of the NAACP.
Good. Thank you, everyone, and good morning. Let me first thank all leaders who braved travel challenges, weather challenges, and the like. I know some flew overnight from the West Coast. I want to thank all of you for being here at this very important moment. We want to thank the National Press Club, and I want to thank the staff team at the National Urban League and the other organizations who worked so hard to pull us together today. Let me also punctuate that this remains the week in observation of the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King. So as we come together, his spirit, his philosophy, his teachings, and his presence, I think, is in this room with us to guide us today. Also want to acknowledge the pain, the suffering, and the loss of those who've been impacted by the Los Angeles and Southern California fires, the terrorist attack in my beloved hometown of New Orleans, and all those who are struggling with the weather emergencies throughout the nation, indeed, at this time. We stand with the people, we stand with the first responders. It is important that we let everyone know that we also stand with those leaders who are working hard to ensure that these responses are effective and go well. And we stand against anyone who would exploit the moment for political purposes. I also want to acknowledge that Maya Wiley, Janet McGee, and John Yang, three of our colleagues, cannot be with us today due to other scheduling challenges and travel. But they wanted me to make sure I express to all of you their commitment to the work that we are doing today. So why are we here today? We're here to stand with the 81% of Americans who support economic opportunity, who support diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we stand against any effort by anyone through any method to reverse the gains of the last 70 years. We stand against that. And we stand against efforts by this administration to repeal, to undercut, or to undermine the hard work of many generations of Americans through what we call unlawful, extra-constitutional, and ill-advised actions. We stand against that. We also stand to reaffirm our commitment and to call this nation to reaffirm its commitment to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, which is the Magna Carta by which this nation's journey towards racial justice has rested for the past 60 years, in addition to a number of judicial decisions before and after, which have created this framework that we operate on. And we also stand to say that diversity, equity, and inclusion is aligned with American values, aligned with American values. E pluribus unum, equal protection of the laws. The idea that everyone has access to the American dream. We will not allow a campaign of smear, distortion, and intimidation to turn efforts to open the doors to everyone as to somehow it is some sort of preference program, it is some sort of program that divides Americans. We say absolutely not. Instead, it is an initiative to unite this nation around the notion that everyone has an equal opportunity to utilize and fulfill their God-given talents in pursuit of prosperity and equality of life. We stand strongly in favor of that. We also send a message today that, to paraphrase a great American president, that we will pay any price, we'll bear any burden, we'll suffer any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe to ensure that economic opportunity and access to jobs, boardrooms, C-suites, city halls, governor's mansion, the White House, business and contractual opportunities are not diminished by this administration or by anyone at this moment in time. This is why we come together. And it is my hope that today marks a start of a concerted effort by us to build a coalition of Americans. We are not afraid. We are not intimidated. We are strong because of what we believe in. We're strong because of our values. We're strong because the hopes that unite us are greater than the fears that divide us. And I'm excited that all of you will contribute to this discussion today. We have a lot on our minds. We all have a lot to say. We all are energized and passionate. Some of us speak like preachers, some of us speak like lawyers, some of us speak like advocates. I'm going to ask you to observe the 2-minute rule, to do the very best you can to observe it, because again, this is the beginning of a conversation. So I'm going to ask everyone to put their hands together to applaud our nerve, our passion, our determination to meet this moment and fight this battle right here and now. And I'm extremely proud at this moment to turn the mic over to our colleague, Janae Nelson, one of the nation's leading civil rights lawyers. Janae, I've been asked that when you begin speaking for everyone, please once again introduce yourself and your organizational affiliation, and then you have 2 minutes. Thank you, Janae.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you everyone for being here. It is so heartening to see all of my colleagues around the table and you here to be part of this press conference. I am Janae Nelson, President and Director Counsel of the Legal Defense Fund. And Mark, this is such an important gathering because, as many of you know, last night we received the latest missive from Trump's second administration that is an attack on the very core of our country and its promise and potential, that being our diversity. And this forum to demand diversity and encourage everyone to step up and stand together as we are here today is the rallying cry that you will hear for the next 4 years as we fight and win against this lawless administration. Since the Supreme Court's decision on affirmative action, we've seen a shocking number of attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion, the latest being the executive orders of yesterday and the day before. As Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson wrote in her dissent to the SFFA decision, the only way out of this morass for all of us is to stare racial disparity unblinkingly and then do what evidence and experts tell us is required to level the playing field and march forward together, collectively, striving to achieve true equality for all Americans. We must answer that call. We cannot be distracted by false narratives and rhetoric from a president that is foaming at the mouth with hate and division. We must respond with force and the rule of law. That is what the Legal Defense Fund has done for the past 85 years. It is what we will continue to do today, and we are very proud to represent the National Urban League and others at this table in response to this assault on core principles of our democracy. It also means that we must reclaim the meaning of the 14th Amendment. We've seen repeated assaults on this anchor of our multiracial democracy, including an attack on birthright citizenship. And we are proud to have joined the ACLU in a lawsuit that we filed yesterday and a motion for a preliminary injunction against the executive order that attempts to rewrite the Constitution beyond the authority of any president and works against everything that we have moved forward in the past 70 years. I'd be remiss if I didn't note that we are celebrating the 70th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education, the 60th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act. We must recognize that we are a new democracy, that we have not always lived up to our ideals. And the attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion is an attempt to restore white nationalism. It is an attempt to end American progress, and it is counter to the majority of Americans who believe in equal opportunity, who believe in inclusion, and recognize that our diversity is our strength. This administration does not have a mandate. Most people who voted did not vote for this president. They did not buy into what he was selling as the future of this democracy. We know that following that path will only lead us to a place of division and destruction. We, around this table, have the majority mandate, and that is one of prosperity. It is one of thriving. It is not one anchored in a zero-sum philosophy. It is anchored in the idea that this country is great enough to provide abundance for all of us. And we have confidence that the rule of law and the enforcement of our civil rights statutes and the Constitution will deliver us from this evil. So with that, I will turn it over to
Virginia K. Solomon.
the next caller.
Virginia, thank you for being here. Thank you, Janae.
Good morning, everyone. Virginia K. Solomon. I am the president and CEO of Common Cause. And one of the things that I think is important, diversity, equity, and inclusion, as we talk about what the goal is, and for us at Common Cause, it is to get to a multiracial representative democracy where all people, regardless of race, have the ability to meet their full potential and have agency over the decisions and laws that govern us. To the people who oppose us, the ones who attack DEI, they have tried to bastardize that acronym. Instead, they want to diminish and exterminate and incapacitate progress towards a multiracial democracy in an effort to maintain white supremacy and concentration of wealth. And let's be very real here. I think we all need to remember that this country was founded to ensure that power was concentrated among wealthy white landowning men. And most of the framers themselves, the only ones who they thought qualified to make decisions and hold power. So for hundreds of years, every single one of us have had to fight time and time again for every single right that we have today. None of our rights were given freely. And it's because of those fights that we have what we have today. There was never a benevolent decision that was made. No amendment to the Constitution was made out of benevolence. And what we've seen that has happened now as a result of the attacks on DEI and things that we thought were settled case law, we've seen how our voting rights have been gutted. We've seen how women's reproductive health has been taken away. And just this week, executive orders attacking the 14th Amendment, gender identification, and apportionment, just to name a few. So unlike what President Trump said in his inaugural speech, their goal is not to have a colorblind society, but one that allows them to concentrate power and wealth. And we have to name that. And as it relates to any kind of transparency and accountability, I think I want to unpack the fact that we can't get to it all here, but we have to look at the role that money has played in our political systems. There are billionaires who are influencing policy, buying elections. Yesterday was the anniversary of Citizens United, and we saw the result of that in this election, where people like Elon Musk were able to put more than $275 million into a race to serve and benefit himself and his businesses. That same Elon Musk, who was raised in apartheid South Africa, the net worth of the people standing on the stage at the inauguration was more than $1 trillion, and that is just the people who were standing on the stage. And now they have unfettered access to the highest levels of government, and their goal is not to see an even playing field here in this country. Their goal is to line their own pockets, and in order to do so, they have to create a permanent underclass. And that is why Common Cause is focused on exposing this corruption to ensure that their dollars are not able to drown out the voices and contributions of everyday people like all of us who are sitting here today. Black, brown, indigenous, LGBTQIA, women, poor people, and others who make up the fabric of our nation, because they will not share it freely.
Thank you very much, Virginia. Juan Peranio.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Virginia. My name is Juan Peranio, and I'm the CEO of LULAC. First and foremost, the dismantling of DEIA infrastructure is a significant setback. The removal of federal DEI requirements and offices undermines essential programs designed to address systemic inequalities. On its face of it, it's racist. These initiatives are not just bureaucratic measures, they are lifelines that help Latino communities overcome historical and structural barriers to success in education, employment, and civic participation. A particularly troubling consequence of these rollbacks is the erosion of language accessibility. The elimination of the White House's Spanish language website is not just an administrative decision, it's a clear marginalization of Spanish-speaking populations. Without access to critical information in the preferred language, many Latinos are left uninformed and disconnected from vital government resources. Moreover, the increasing fear driven by immigration enforcement actions, such as planned raids in cities like Chicago, is having a chilling effect. Many Latinos are now afraid to engage in public life, which not only weakens community cohesion, but also discourages individuals from seeking essential services such as healthcare and education. The economic impact of these DEIA measures cannot be overstated. Fear-driven decreases in public activity have already been observed in Chicago's Little Village, where foot traffic has dropped by 50%. Latino-owned businesses are suffering, and entire local economies are at risk, undermining the hard-fought progress we have made. Beyond economic concerns, the rollback of DEIA initiatives threaten to reverse the hard-won progress of social inclusion. This deepens existing disparities, particularly in employment and education, where Latinos have significantly faced barriers. Employment remains a pressing issue as well. Considering this, in March 2021, Pew Research released a survey that 54% of Hispanic adults in the U.S. experienced at least one form of workplace discrimination in the past year. Wage disparities continue to persist, and Latinas only earning 55% of what non-Hispanic white men earn in 2024, despite modest 4% growth in wages since 2019. Leadership representation is another area of concern, with Latinas making up only 1% of C-suite executives in corporate America. Furthermore, occupational segregation continues to confine many Latinos to low-wage jobs with minimal benefits and higher rates of labor violations.
Thank you, Juan. Maya.
Thank you so much for convening us today, and I associate myself with the comments of all of my colleagues because of the importance of the content of what they're sharing today. One of the issues that's challenging here is that we need to have this conversation about these values that are American values as opposed to the kind of disinformation and misinformation that is out there about these issues. My name is Maya Berry, and I'm the Executive Director of the Arab American Institute. I represent a national civil rights advocacy organization that seeks to empower and represent the interests of the roughly 3.7 million Arab Americans in this country. One of the ways in which these issues impact us perhaps differently is that we're coming into this with a lot of misunderstanding about our community. But one of the key elements that we need to kind of apply consistently across the board to every single American, every single community, is that Arab Americans require public safety. That requires that we are represented and serviced by a workforce that looks like all of us. Arab Americans require innovation to continue to happen because it's necessary for products to develop, for safe products to happen. That requires a diverse workforce so that we can continue to have the kind of American innovation that we expect. I will share, Mark mentioned the 81% of Americans who said that they supported diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. Keep that number in mind when this particular topic became our new critical race theory that came before it, the new Sharia law. There's been a progression of things that have attempted to alienate us as a society. So even in the context of that level of disinformation, 81% of Americans said they supported this. We put a poll in the field in October, second to the last poll of Arab Americans. That poll, 38% identified as Republican, 38% identified as Democrats, and another sort of 16% were independents. In that poll, 67% of Arab Americans said they were deeply concerned about companies scaling back their programs of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And one of the things that was interesting in that poll is technically our older population tends to skew a little more conservative, and it's our young people that elevate those numbers. Among Arab Americans 65 and older, that number was at 84%. There is wisdom, I think, in our folks who understand why these programs exist, why we need them, and why they must continue. So for those in the boardroom that need to think about what they call this, how about you not worry about what you call it and start leaning into doing it? For those in the universities who are trying to figure out what this means, how about you make sure that you provide for your students and your professors an environment that allows learning to continue to excel? For members of Congress that are staffing now their congressional offices, how about they need to make sure that who they hire is representative of the 760,000 people that live in their district, their constituents? That is what must happen. We call this demanding diversity, but the truth is we can call it demanding America, because that is what this program is about. Thank you.
Thanks, Maya. Greg Orton.
Good morning, everyone. Greg Orton, the National Director with the National Council of Asian Pacific Americans. And I'm here today to say clearly, resoundingly, and resolutely that the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander community stands firmly in support of DE&I. We will demand diversity, and we're proud to work with everyone here, our colleagues who we've been working with for a very long time, to make sure that our community is seen in the right light when it comes to this debate. But as I was reflecting on today, I thought about this whole DEI debate really reveals some of the misperceptions about our community when it comes to racial equity, the work that we've been talking about. On the one hand, we have the model minority stereotype, which continues to drive a narrative of community-wide success and invisibilizes the real-world challenges that millions of our community members face. Now, on the other hand, we have another racial misperception that we are the perpetual foreigner, right? An immigrant threat that no matter how long you've been in this country, immediately it can invalidate and invisibilize your American identity, call into question your loyalty to this country, regardless of how long your family has been in this country contributing for their entire lives. But really, at the end of the day, this debate is about what you believe in and what you're willing to stand for. Because during the pandemic, We were thrilled to see so many partners and corporate partners and funders move quickly to move resources to address the very real challenges that our community faced in that moment. But now that the chips are down, we're starting to see that that commitment, rather than being permanent, was more performative, right? And that is a major threat to the work that all of us are trying to do. And so again, the question comes down to, what do we stand for? What are we willing to fight for? And again, I'm here to say definitively that our 44 members of NCAPA, 44 of the largest Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander civil rights organizations in the country, we believe that this diversity matters, right? And even in our own right, our community is incredibly diverse. More than just East Asian faces like mine, right? We have South Asian, Southeast Asian, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islanders. It's truly important to recognize that that diversity is what drives us to this table to make sure that we show up for this fight. I'll close in saying this. The reason opponents of DEI are attacking it is because it works, right? It is simply about power control. When our communities of color are given an opportunity to empower ourselves, that directly threatens their ability to control us, and that's why we fight. The solution isn't to necessarily demand the DE&I as a quota or a handout. It is simply about opportunity. Now, the last thing I will say is, look, this is one of the things I truly struggle with is choosing not to see discrimination or racism in your everyday life. What a remarkable privilege, right? Because there are millions of Americans of all races, all creeds, who deal with discrimination every single day. So we can't simply just erase it because we don't want to deal with it. So again, it's a pleasure and an honor to share space with all of you. We're down for this fight. We're ready for it. We're not going to give up. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Kelly Robinson.
Hey everyone, I'm Kelly Robinson, president of the Human Rights Campaign Foundation. Grateful to be here. And I just have to say, the diversity of our nation, the diversity of this table, it is our greatest strength. And when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, let's not sugarcoat it. It's good for people, but it's also good for business. What this work is really about is attracting top talent, about earning the business of consumers across this country and the world. It's about increasing the bottom lines of business. And what I want to say is that the future that our opponents are so afraid of, future that opponents of diversity are so afraid of, it is already here. LGBTQ plus people in America represent $1.4 trillion in buying power. 30% of Generation Z identify as a member of our community, and yet still, a third of our community experiences harassment and discrimination at work. And yet still, violence is increasing day over day, month after month, as reported by the FBI. This is a moment where for us to embrace the opportunity of tomorrow, we've got to stand and protect the progress that we've made of today, especially in workplaces and schools, the places that we live, learn, work, and heal. And for me, I think there are two calls to action for our organization, for our allies around this table. One, to push back against an administration that wants to diminish the progress that we've made. We have to be clear. No executive order can override our constitutional rights, our rights to equal protection under the law. And two, to expand this table of allies that we're partnering with. For my community, businesses have often stood in the gap between the world that we have and the world that we want to create. When HIV was ravaging our community, we saw companies like Levi's and Nike feature HIV-positive athletes and models. When marriage was a debate still for our community, we saw companies like Subaru and Absolute embrace us and show the humanity of our people. This is another moment where businesses can stand in the gap, where we're seeing companies like Costco stand up to protect diversity. Leaders like Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan Chase do the same. And in fact, with our Corporate Equality Index, we have had the highest participation we ever have had, with over 1,450 companies actively participating to make sure that their workplaces are more inclusive. So this is not a time for us to retreat on our progress. It's a time for us to double down. And the last thing I'll say is my mentor and friend, Cecile Richards, passed just this Monday. And one, she was such a leader for all the issues that we all fight for. But one of the statements, quotes that her family shared was, in moments like this, when our world faced the greatest challenges, oftentimes we will be asked, what did you do? And the only acceptable answer is everything that we possibly could. That's what we are charged to do, whether you are an activist, an employee, someone who owns a company, or someone who wants to fight within your schools. We have to do everything that we can right now.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm going to stay over here. I know it's got me bouncing, but let's go to Fatima and Derek, and then come over here to Amy next. So we'll complete this side of the table. So Fatima.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you, Kelly, for closing with that wonderful quote from Cecile Richards. I'm Fatima Goss-Graves. I'm president and CEO of the National Women's Law Center, and I woke up this morning after reading the late-night executive order in all the detail, and so I changed my remarks and have three things to say.
Go ahead.
The first is, it is really important, I think, that we focus in on what the real agenda we are facing is right now. And that is, they are not just attacking efforts at diversity. They are going for our core and foundational civil rights infrastructure. And so we should be clear that the reason that they are using an acronym always when talking about, rather than talking about diversity and equity, the reason that they are using the phrase DEI every single time is to make it more alienating and to strip the power away from the ideals of diversity. The other thing they are trying to do right now is to bully businesses and schools and anyone who has been trying to shift their culture to finally address the scourge of discrimination into submission. And that bullying is now going to take the effect of having the force and weight of the federal law behind it, rather than following the 60-year-old promise of the Johnson-era executive order that required those who do business with the federal government, who profit off the backs of taxpayers, to use that opportunity to address discrimination. They are saying the opposite. They are saying you are better off if you do nothing in this moment, because we will use our power to investigate you for engaging in thoughtful programs to address discrimination. It cannot stand not only on the watches of those who are around this table, anyone in this country who is worried about the weaponization of the government, or who is worried about our ability to work and learn with safety and dignity in this country, must show up. That includes employers, that includes people in community, that includes everyone using the power that they have. The final thing that I will just say is that the late night missives will continue to come, but that is not the end of the story. All of us will defend the right for people to work and learn with safety and dignity. We'll do it in the courts, and we will expect those who represent us to work alongside us and to stand up with us as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Fatima. Derek?
Thank you, Mark, for pulling this together. And I want to thank all of my colleagues. I agree with everything that was said. And although it's outrageous, but it's not surprising that the president has decided to roll back diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. Programs that would help ensure that all Americans can have a true opportunity to prosper. And where the executive order will only worsen Americans' racial hierarchy, it would truly benefit an oligarch class. The executive order will undermine public services. It would seek to curtail the role of government. And in short, it's only the tip of the iceberg. To roll back these programs now opens the door to redefine the role of government, to privatize essential services, and to further discriminate against individuals because of their uniqueness, as opposed to celebrate their uniqueness as a part of what has made America truly great. And so as we are bringing attention to what has taken place, I would like to remind all of Americans, it will be you next. Because as services are privatized, the cost of things will go up, because profit will be placed over people, race, gender, and otherwise. It is only the tool, but the outcome is to enrich a small class of individuals by leveraging our tax dollars in ways in which our democracy will be so undermined. We will be looking at a federal government that will be a shell of itself if we don't stand up now, and all Americans, especially white Americans, recognize what's taking place. It is subverting democracy, privatizing government and leveraging our tax dollars for the benefit of a small group and limiting our opportunity to prosper as a country. Thank you.
Derek, thank you very, very much. And let's give this side of the table a round of applause. Appreciate the incredible remarks. And we're going to go over to Amy, and we're going to come all the way around, and then, Siobhan, you get the last word before we have a discussion. Amy.
I'm Amy Spitalnik, the CEO of the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, and I'm honored to be here on behalf of the Jewish community alongside so many of our partners in the civil rights and democracy space. And I want to contextualize what we're talking about here. Nothing that's happening right now is accidental, from the racist attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion to draconian anti-immigrant, anti-LGBTQ executive orders, to the pardon of violent extremists, to overt hate from Nazi salutes to emboldened white supremacists and others targeting the Black, Jewish, Latino, Muslim, Arab, AAPI, and other communities. It's all part of a broader effort to normalize bigotry, dehumanization, and extremism. And that means we need to recognize how at the core of these extremist attacks is an effort to intentionally pit our communities against one another, to suggest a zero-sum frame in which advancing the rights and safety of one community somehow comes at the expense of another. And I want to be clear, I want to specifically name how extreme voices have sought to exploit the very real pain in the Jewish community right now over the last 15 months, the subsequent spike in anti-Semitism here in the United States after October 7th. It's real pain felt by the Jewish community, and we've seen extremists in all directions seek to advance and exploit it to advance an extremist agenda that pits Jews against others, that suggests that the only way to address anti-Semitism is to somehow end diversity, equity, and inclusion and other efforts aimed at a more inclusive democracy, or that Jews shouldn't be a part of the movement for civil rights and social justice. So make no mistake, advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion is not only important to the Jewish community because of our values, although that's true. It's not only important because of the deep diversity of the Jewish community, from Jews of color to LGBTQ Jews and so many others, although that's also true. It's important for all of those reasons, but it's also important because our safety as Jews is inextricably linked with inclusive, pluralistic democracy, with confronting systemic injustice, and with ensuring each and every community has a fair shot. And so we know it's not just possible, but necessary to counter racism and broader bigotry and advance diversity, equity, and inclusion for the sake of all communities' rights and safety, and to do so in a way that is truly inclusive of the Jewish community, our history, and our identities. Because just as anti-Semitism and the conspiracy theories that underpin it are used to advance dehumanizing policies, hate, and violence that target not just Jews, but so many communities and our democracy itself, so too, as our democratic norms and values are attacked and eroded, does anti-Semitism flourish, and the safety of Jews and each and every community is further threatened. And so the only path forward is one in which we recognize that our safety and our futures are inextricably linked, that diversity and pluralism are our greatest strengths, that building strong, inclusive coalitions where all of us can show up as our true selves without having to check our identities at the door is existential to all of our communities. So that's at the core of our work at JCPA as we mobilize to protect democracy and counter hate. And it's rooted in this deep recognition that Jewish safety is inextricably tied to democracy, just as inclusive multiracial democracy is inextricably tied to Jewish safety. I'm grateful to the National Urban League and Mark and all of our co-conveners here today, and I want to be clear that this is just the beginning of the many fights ahead. Please know that the Jewish Americans will be there every step of the way because our values and our own safety demand it.
Thank you very much, Amy. Kimberly.
Good morning. First, I want to express my gratitude to you, Mark, for convening this important conversation. As you mentioned, I flew in to be part of this. So I'm a little sleep deprived, but my spirit is here with you all. You know, flying from one site of devastation to another made it impossible not to see the connections between the two. Coming in this morning, recognizing that those who represent the best of our values are now looking for jobs, while those who represent the worst of our nightmares are being released from prison, tells us how much devastation we're dealing with right now. And I think for some people, just like the fire seemed like the devastation came from nowhere, and they might think that what we're looking at right now came from nowhere, the conditions have been set for years. When Donald Trump refused to repudiate the Proud Boys, and came back in 30 days with an executive order attacking diversity, equity, and inclusion, that was setting up the brush that now is being ignited across the country. So it's clear that we have no choice but to fight. But for some people, that's going to seem a questionable idea. For the last several years, the notion that we should fight it head on has been somewhat debated. We know now that pivoting doesn't work. We know now that trying to rebrand what we do doesn't work. We know now that what they're coming after is not one form of thinking. It's not Black history. It's not intersectionality. It's not critical race theory. They're coming after the entire infrastructure that has been created from the civil rights movement. So if they have been willing to throw everything that we have accomplished to perfect this democracy onto the fire, then what is our response? What do we have to do differently? We know we have to fight collaboratively, we have to fight collectively, we have to fight creatively, but we also have to fight with an idea that we refuse to allow any of what we have created to be lost. Here's the thing that I want to leave with. It was clear that the reason that we're still fighting this is that they have never given up. The flamethrowers did not give up after the Civil War was lost. The flamethrowers did not give up after Reconstruction. They did not give up after Brown versus Board of Education. No, massive resistance was the name of their resistance. What's our version of that? What are we going to do to make sure that we do not give up? So I'm so pleased to be part of this. I do understand that we cannot have a DEI practice that's not grounded in an analysis of why we need DEI in the first place, which is why they go after history, why they go after intersectionality, why they go after our frameworks. You can't fix a problem you cannot name. We at AAPF are all about trying to provide all the tools necessary so we can name where the deficits are in our institutions to be better situated to address them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kimberly. Damon?
Brother Mark Morial, thank you for your leadership and colleagues assembled. We've all been in trenches together, and now we have many more trenches to go. I'm Damon Hewitt, President and Executive Director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, an organization founded at a time of crisis like this, when President Kennedy brought together nearly 250 lawyers from the private bar to get them in the game on civil rights. And millions of pro bono hours later, and many victories and many challenges later, we're still here fighting alongside our colleagues in this movement. Our modern mission is to ensure that Black people primarily and other communities of color have the voice, opportunity, and power to make the promise of democracy real. What's happening is the opposite right now. They're taking away our voice by telling us what we cannot learn in the nation's classrooms and K-12 curriculum. They're sapping our power by failing to defend and protect voting rights and opportunity, as my colleagues have said. What is happening is, as others have articulated, an attack on the very foundations of not just civil rights cases and jurisprudence and laws. It's an attack on people. That's exactly what it is. When you say you're against diversity, equity, and inclusion, or the short form as they use DEI, what they're really telling us is they're for the opposite of diversity, racial isolation. They are for the opposite of equity, gross inequity and unfairness. They are for the opposite of inclusion, which is racialized exclusion. That's exactly what they're for. Believe these people when they show us who they are. That is our appeal to America. Now, we also have a message for others. There will be litigation, there will be policy, there will be public fights against this false narrative and all of these mechanics of what's happening. But our message is not just to the instruments of government, federal, state, local, it's also to the enablers, the people who are bowing to the pressure or racing to get in line out of convenience or expedience or out of profit motive. We want to call folks in, but we certainly will call folks out too. And our message to people in corporate America and private America is this: you have not just a choice here about which way to go, you have an obligation. Because DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs are not a favor or a handout, they're part of your affirmative legal obligation. We will hold you to the standard to satisfy your obligations, and the government has an obligation too. And so we will meet them in the streets in peaceful protest and supporting that. We'll meet them in the halls of power. We'll also meet them in court to fight tooth and nail against all of these instrumentalities, these mechanisms to flip the script and to take laws designed to promote opportunity, to promote inclusion, and use them for a small class of people who already have way more power than they would ever need. That's how I stand at the Lawyers Committee, and we're proud to stand together with everyone here.
Thank you very much, Damon. Brenda?
It is an honor to be in community with all of you today. Thank you so much, Mark, for including us. My name is Brenda Victoria Castillo, and I am the first woman president and CEO of the National Hispanic Media Coalition. I'm an Indigenous Latina feminist, first generation. NHMC was founded to eliminate hate and discrimination and racism towards the Latino community. And I would like to remind people, when I use the term Latino, I mean all of us. We are Indigenous Latinos, we are Afro-Latinos, we're Asian Latinos, we're members of the LGBTQ+ communities. We are veterans. We have disabilities. We speak Spanish, some of us are monolingual. We are multicultural. And the future of America is multicultural. And I want to come back to that at the end. I was asked to speak today about the need to ensure accurate and equitable portrayals of Latinos communities in media. Representation. Representation matters. We need representation at the highest level: media ownership, board of directors, C-suite positions, the Greenlight projects, and companies must support diverse workforce development programs. What we also need, though, is the Latino community that represents a buying power of $3.6 trillion. In 2024, it was increased by 13%. Our buying power is $3.6 trillion, not billion, trillion dollars. This is why NHMC focuses on our policy work here in Washington, D.C., to our media work, advocacy work in Hollywood, where we connect, collaborate, and create opportunities through our workforce development programs. We partner with corporate America, but we focus on media companies because it is one of the most influential and powerful institutions that shape society's mind, attitudes, values, and beliefs. And the way we are portrayed is the way we are treated in real life, and we're not always treated that well. I like to keep things simple. So currently, 40 to 42% of the population in the United States is diverse. Half of that, 20%, are Latinos. We are the consumers. We are the customer base. The U.S. is projected to become more diverse by 2045, as diverse Americans are projected to account for 50.3% of the population. And studies show that businesses are more successful when they build workforces that represent their communities that they serve, that are their customer base. So my message to media companies, to corporate America, is anti-DEI doesn't make common sense. Are you in the business to make money, to be successful? Of course you are. Anti-diversity, as far as I'm concerned, is anti-business. The answer is not rolling back on diversity. The answer is to continue to support, to increase these programs. Now, to the Latino population, to diverse populations, flex your buying power. If a company is not supporting your community, does not reflect your community, it's simple, do not purchase that product. We have the power. In ending, I want to say that we're not going anywhere. They keep telling us that they're gonna kick us across the board. No, I'm not going anyplace. We are moving forward, and we are united in this room with these organizations that I'm proud to be sitting here by, collaborating and united. We're contributing to the workforce, we're contributing to the economy of the United States of America. The future of America is multicultural, and Latinos are multicultural. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. Samantha.
Thank you, Mark, for bringing us all together today. And thank you to the leaders around this table for your tremendous leadership today and every day. I'm Samantha Tweedy. I'm the CEO of the Black Economic Alliance Foundation. The BEA Foundation was founded by a group of some of our country's top Black business leaders who came together to harness the business acumen, the influence, and the resources of the business community in service of advancing work, wages, and wealth across the Black community. Now, as business leaders, we are laser focused on the data. And not always, but oftentimes, that helps us to separate signal from the noise. And that is exactly what happened when, in the wake of the Supreme Court affirmative action decision on higher education and the immediate chilling effect and clawback of diversity initiatives in the corporate sector, we went out and asked through a poll what the American people thought about racial diversity and all diversity in business. And Mark started our conversation this way because the results were truly striking. What we found was that 81% of Americans supported diversity in business. I say those words so slowly because when, at this point in time in this country, do 81% of Americans say that they agree on very much? And notably, that included about 80% of white Americans and about 73% of conservatives agreeing that businesses and corporate America should reflect the diversity of this country. So in this moment, what we see is that we are called as if we are on the outside. But the reality is, as we sit here and talk about demanding diversity, we are absolutely representative of what the vast majority of this country wants. And when you dig into the data on the impact of diversity in business, it makes complete sense that the American people see what is real. You know, there is too much data to bring into this conversation, but I'll just point to one incredibly important data point out of McKinsey, which tells us that companies that have more diversity in their executive teams are nearly 40% more effective. That's the bottom line we're talking about there. So this striking data may cause us to pause and say, is it just in this sector? Is it just when we're asking the question specifically around diversity or diversity in business? But what we see is that it is actually entirely reflective of what the data tells us more broadly about the positive impact of closing disparities that are rooted around racial and economic differences. What that data tells us is that if we are able to close racial and economic gaps, that doing so doesn't benefit one group of us over another, that it's actually the exact opposite of a zero-sum framework, that it benefits all Americans by benefiting our entire economy. For example, data out of Citi showed us that if we close racial economic gaps over just the last 2 decades, we would have added $16 trillion to the US GDP. That's not the black and brown GDP, right? That's not the marginalized group's GDP. That is the GDP of the United States of America. And the same holds true for corporate diversity. The same holds true for diversity initiatives, that they benefit the bottom line, they benefit companies. And so we at BEA are telling companies now what we have told companies since we got this data, that diversity is popular with Americans, and that it's popular with Americans of all stripes because Americans understand that it creates value for businesses. And so this is good for the company, it's good for the economy as a whole, good for our country, and certainly worth defending.
Thank you very much, Samantha. Alfonso?
Good morning. Mark, thank you for organizing this conference and moderating this critical conversation. Good morning, everyone. I'm Alfonso David. I am the president and CEO of the Global Black Economic Forum. We work with the business community, we work with the philanthropic community, we work with organizations around the globe to advance economic opportunity for marginalized communities. And as we focus on this effort and this fight, I want to address 2 core issues that I don't think get enough attention. One is the facts, and the second is accountability. I think we all need to operate with the same set of facts, and over the past few years, coordinated disinformation campaigns have sought to discredit and redefine diversity, equity, and inclusion by framing it as divisive, unnecessary, or worse, perpetuating mediocrity. So the 2025 anti-quote DEI executive orders that have been issued by this new administration seeks to place restrictions on programs that at their core seek to do one thing: advance economic opportunity. That's the goal. And these executive orders are premised on the argument that they are forging a society that is, quote, colorblind and merit-based. The only problem with that argument is that it ignores the facts. So the facts are, the majority of people in executive positions are white men. Those are the facts. They're not people of color, and they're not women. They are not excluded from those roles based on merit. They're excluded from those roles based on who they are, based on the color of their skin, based on their gender. The wage and the wealth gap continue to widen decade after decade. In fact, black families hold less than 15% of the wealth of white families. And black workers earn 76 cents to every white person's dollar. Those are the facts. And as many of my colleagues will say, there is evidence that racial minorities and women and LGBTQ people continue to face ongoing discrimination in hiring, in retention, and promotion, in government roles, and in all industries. If anyone says that they're interested in economic progress for all, it begins with addressing the racial wealth gap, from the legacy of slavery to redlining in housing, exclusion from the New Deal programs, discriminatory lending practices. Black people in this country have been systemically denied opportunities to build wealth. And that's what we're talking about. You don't ignore merit when you advance diversity programs. You address bias. You advance economic opportunities for all. These executive orders are part of, and as you've heard before from some of my colleagues, a part of a larger coordinated effort. I have the privilege of representing the Fairless Fund in court, a venture capital firm that, as you all know, was sued for seeking to provide equal opportunity to people of color. And this is a coordinated fight that we know we will win. But I'll close by saying this. Let's be clear that by remaining silent or supporting these executive orders, or actions, if you will, Republicans are making it safe to discriminate in the United States. They're making it safe to discriminate in the military. They're making it safe to discriminate in the private sector. They're making it safe to discriminate against black people, brown people, LGBTQ people, women. When Republicans are silent in the face of these executive orders, they're simply saying that we're making it safer to discriminate. And I know that some businesses feel threatened in this environment, especially in light of the executive order that was issued this morning. But let's be clear, that executive order is tailored to instill fear. And I would say to corporate leaders, remember your consumers, remember your fiduciary obligations, and remember the law. If you are in business and your business is to generate revenues, you have to comply with the law. You have to make sure you're not ignoring systemic bias. And if you ignore the law, we will be here to remind you of it.
Thank you very much, Alfonso. Margaret.
Mark, thank you so much for convening this group to demonstrate the strength, the passion for, and the commitment to this work that we will do together. I want to start by noting that this fight is not new. You've heard many of my colleagues. This is the same battle against hate that we have been waging for generations. Only now it's dressed up with new names and new vocabulary. In the South, we've watched how white supremacy continues to reshape itself, from Jim Crow laws to poll taxes and now to the assault on DEIA. But we have also led the resistance against them. And today, the South remains ground zero for the fights ahead. Before Project 2025, we saw the passage of legislation like Florida's Stop Woke Act and Alabama's SB 129, laws that gutted DEI initiatives in universities, workplaces, and government. The South offers 3 important lessons that I think we have to take to heart. First, we have to be clear what we are fighting against and what we are fighting for. The attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion are part of the broader effort, as so many my colleagues have noted, to preserve racial inequality. It is hijacking education, using anti-DEI laws to restrict the honest teaching of American history, and it is weaponizing our civil rights laws. We've seen right-wing litigators, under the guise of fighting, quote, reverse discrimination, weaponize laws like Title VI and Section 1981 to dismantle vital programs that support Black and brown communities. Second, we need to track and expose the well-funded, organized networks that are driving these anti-DEI campaigns. Extremist groups have always driven the anti-civil rights agenda. Their tactics may change, but their goal is the same: to roll back racial progress. At the SPLC, we monitor and expose these groups and their operations. We've uncovered how groups like the Alliance Defending Freedom use, quote, viewpoint diversity to push corporations into adopting exclusionary policies. We've documented how Moms for Liberty has hijacked parental rights to undermine DEIA efforts in our schools. And we've traced the funding behind these efforts from sources like the Bradley Impact Fund and the Documentary Foundation. These groups are well-funded and coordinated, and so we need to make sure we all know who is behind this. Together, we have to engage in a robust education and outreach effort to reach people across the country where they are. The 81% is going to continue to build power from the ground up in our communities to mobilize for action. The South may be ground zero for attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it is also the birthplace of our resistance, where broad coalitions have come together, like the one you see before you today. And we've organized and we've fought back to advance justice and opportunity. It was the activism in the South that ignited the movement for civil rights, one that reshaped not just the region, but the entire nation and, in fact, the world. Each of us here today stands as a beneficiary of that movement, and that's why what's at stake to protect diversity, equity, and inclusion, that's why we will give everything to keep this fight going. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Sheila?
Thank you, Mark. Let me first start by just acknowledging a legend in my beloved Jewish community who's here in the room. I see Yolanda Savage-Narva here, Vice President of Union for Reform Judaism, the largest denomination of Judaism, and the senior-most Black Jew in any major Jewish organization who works at the intersection of combating racism and anti-Semitism, who I learn from every day. It is good to see you, my friends. I am honored to speak to you on behalf of the National Council of Jewish Women because our founding in itself tells a story of what happens when today's values of DEI are not in place. 131 years ago, Hannah G. Solomon wanted to present on behalf of Jewish women at the Chicago World Fair, and when she arrived, the men asked her to pour coffee instead. So in sum, she left and founded the National Council of Jewish Women, but first, before that, she went to the women's groups and they said no Jews. So we were founded when men didn't let women in, and when women didn't let Jews in, to ensure that Jewish women have a seat at any table we want to be at, to use our Jewish values to fight for the full equity and safety of women, children, and families. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is essential to this vision. So let me begin with a simple truth. Promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion is not political, it is moral. It's about treating every person with dignity and fairness, creating workspaces and schools where all people, regardless of their race, religion, gender, and abilities, can thrive. This is not complicated. DEI policies are a counterweight to centuries of discrimination and exclusion. The playing field is simply not level, and gender disparities persist. Women in the United States earn just 82 cents for every dollar earned by men, with even wider gaps for women of color. These inequities stem from systemic barriers that have long undervalued women's work and limited our opportunities. Ignoring these disparities allow them to continue. Gender equity requires a sustained commitment to DEI, not as a trend, but as a necessity. From pay equity to leadership access, real progress demands long-term systemic change. Abandoning DEI now risks undoing hard-won gains. The fight for gender equality is far from over, and we must keep pushing forward. DEI is the vision to fix these problems and more, to repair a broken system and create a world where women and all people are valued equally for their contributions. As the head of the nation's oldest Jewish women's organization, we know exclusion all too well. Anti-Semitism is at an all-time high. And while there has been progress, we do continue to sometimes see Jews being left out of DEI, particularly on college campuses and now in hiring. Right now, 1 in 4 hiring managers say they're less likely to hire Jews. Just because DEI hasn't solved this yet doesn't mean anyone should be trying to eliminate it. It means we must do better to be more inclusive and help more people recognize patterns of unconscious bias and discrimination impacting all marginalized communities. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is the path towards a dream to create workplaces, schools, and communities where no one is left behind because of their identity. So we're here today together to continue our collective work to further diversity, equity, and inclusion as a sacred moral obligation.
Thank you very much, Sheila. Siobhan?
Good afternoon, everyone. Mark, it's an honor to be here with you to represent the National Council of Negro Women. I want to start with the Harvard Business Review that had an article in December 2024 stating, continuing the work of DEI no matter what your company calls it. There's some key statistics that I want to share with you today. That from 2020 to 2023, we saw 66% of DEI budgets increase. 73% of corporations actually included DEI in their values. And 63% of those companies focused on DEI partnerships with organizations like all of us around this table. But by the end of 2024, the targeted group that lost ground were women. And for our community, Black women. An 8% decrease in gender representation goals was present in all corporations that were captured in this data. This work for equal pay for women has been a priority for many of us, where Black women still try to work to close the gap of 34 cents on every one white male dollar. We've coined a phrase in NCNW, if women are working, the country is working. But I've had to add, if Black women are working, that means the entire system is working. The question that's been posed today has been, how can women's organizations lead in promoting DEI, and what roles can community-based leaders like us play in sustaining the movement? A few things to consider. Women's organizations and my colleagues can identify corporations and partners that champion the work of DEI. There's been consistent conversations around removing our partnership, but I'm here to say we want to highlight our partners and our friends, those champions in tech, healthcare, hospitality, telecom, and economics, many of them Black women who stand as the leaders in those positions. The second is to invest in talent access and talent development. The idea of allyship and mentoring is one thing, but the challenge that we find, according to Forbes, is that if you do not have diversity, you don't increase business development, you can't make critical decisions as a corporation, you won't attract the top talent, and you cannot perform or achieve success without a diverse and inclusive corporation. We're third calling for data collection efforts to continue to track not only progress, but regress. The challenge that we have in data collection is that we constantly talk about the good numbers. Well, it's important for us to understand how in a year's time we can see a decrease in percentages of gender representation and not say a word. And finally, the consumer and voting bloc empowerment strategy. Today we're here talking about DEI, but I will not leave here without talking about the ability to have a voting bloc that can affect DEI. For those that are here under the sound of our voices, Nielsen has said that now Black people have been a consumer power of over $2 trillion, and Black women make up almost 70% of that $2 trillion. Our buying power and our people power has not been honored. But today, in this culture of cancellation, I want to close with these words. It is important to stand even if there are no words. The work cannot end. I call on us now to collaborate, to advance justice, advance voting rights, but it also advance people's rights. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Siobhan. Melanie Campbell's joined us. Melanie, thank you. I know you braved some travel challenges to get here from snowy Georgia, but thank you for joining us. Go ahead, Melanie.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, colleagues. It's a heavy day. My heart is heavy in this moment as we think about the fact that just Monday we observed Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday and all he stood for. His words calling for equity and fairness were weaponized as President Donald Trump signed an executive order that would dismantle or attempt to dismantle diversity, equity, and inclusion in the federal government, calling DEI programs illegal and immoral discrimination programs. The fact of the matter is that last I checked, when I look at my paycheck, federal taxes come out of my paycheck. State taxes come out of my paycheck. Local taxes come out of my paycheck. So to have the audacity to say that taking my tax dollars, your tax dollars, and anyone's tax dollars, and say that we don't have a right for those dollars to come back to our community is immoral. This moment demands vigilance. DEI rollbacks are an attack on progress, and we must respond with unity as we are today and resolve. We will organize. We are strategizing. Everything won't be on the television. Everything won't be like our ancestors did and our predecessors did. Some things you just don't have, it would not be televised or on social media there, right? We're gonna have to do what we have to do for our communities because of the folks who laid the groundwork for us, our predecessors had more hurdles than we have. We have a lot at stake. 2026 will blink and it'll be here before you know it. And we won't go back. We're gonna move forward. Yes, it's gonna be hard, but nothing has ever been easy for our communities collectively in this country. So thank you, Mark, for the moment.
Thank you. Thank you.
And let's fight on.
Thank you. Thank you. Give everyone a hand for those great remarks. In a moment remaining, I want to have a discussion, but let me say a few things at the top. First, Reverend Al Sharpton could not join us, had planned to join us, but did Morning Joe this morning and could not travel, but he is with us in full support and in spirit. A few things. Let us commit today that we are prepared to lead a massive resistance movement. Let us commit today that that massive resistance movement will use every resource we have, every asset we have. Around this table, we have brilliant litigators. Around this table, we have brilliant policy minds. Around this table, the communities represented exceed over 100 million Americans. Let us lead this movement and let us initiate this movement, understanding that, as I said at the top, 81% of the American people are in concert with us. Just because those in power are loud and indignant and accusatory, does not mean that they are right or that they will win. This will test us. I look around this table, myself included, as a generation and generations of people who were the beneficiaries of tremendous sacrifice by others. They started a great social justice movement in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, and it really began after Plessy, when the NAACP was founded, when the National Urban League was founded, in the early days of the 1900s, when the vote had been stripped away, when Plessy v. Ferguson constitutionalized discrimination and segregation. And that long, long movement which had an apex in the 1950s and 60s, produced an America that has allowed us to walk through doors, to sit at tables, to be elected to public office, to rise the ladder in higher ed and in corporate America. And now we are challenged in a way. I lost my mother last year. She repeatedly reminded me almost every day from 2016 on after the election that what she saw was as bad as anything she had seen since the 1950s. And she would call and say, do something. You all better do something, because I see a movement birthing itself that equates to what we saw in the 1950s. We must be the massive resistance. And we must energize those who are in elected office, who are our allies and friends, that this is not a moment for paralysis of analysis, it's a moment for action. We must energize those in positions of economic power that collectively around this table, the communities represented, represent more than $5 trillion in consumer spending power. And that consumer spending power is a tool to be deployed and employed. We must use everything that we have to fight this battle. It was important for us to send a message to those that wrote this series of executive orders, that these executive orders are unlawful, they are unconstitutional, and they seek to do what we always suspected. This is not a monarchy. You can't rule by decree or edict. This is a constitutional democracy. There are statutes with obligations. There's a body of jurisprudence that represent precedent that we stand on. And we have to recognize that and remember this as we go into this very, very significant and important battle. Now, everyone will ask us, what did we do today? What action steps did we take? Melanie hinted at this. We're not telegraphing our blows. We're not going to sit here and muse about what we're going to do until we have had an opportunity to build the consensus that we need amongst ourselves. So to that end, this is a beginning. We will be inviting everyone to participate in a further conversation that will be more of an executive session off the record where we can have those kind of candid and important conversations. But meanwhile, we have a number of folks in the room who are the tip of the spear when it comes to litigation. I want to ask Janae and Damon to sort of paint the landscape, because there's been some litigation in the past. There are options that may be on the table. We may not be prepared to announce what those steps may be, but what can you share to people listening in with respect to the legal landscape around these executive orders and this fight? We'll go to Janae, and Damon will come to you, because you all have done a tremendous amount of work. Then I'll open to anyone else who wants to address that, and then I'd like to have a conversation about policy and a little bit about consumer power as well. Janae.
So thank you, Mark, for the question and for the rich conversation. One thing to note is that the power of litigation should never be underestimated. We sued the first Trump administration. There was an executive order that many of you may remember around divisive concepts, Executive Order 13950. We represented the National Urban League, the National Fair Housing Alliance, and we brought a lawsuit, as did Lambda Legal. And as a result of that litigation, there was an injunction that led to the ultimate end of that executive order once President Biden got into office and rescinded it. But it was already enjoined at the time that he entered office. If you look at the 2 executive orders and really the slew of them that have many elements of what was contained in that prior administration's order, you will see some significant differences because they learned what was unlawful, illegal, and ultimately enjoined as a result of the litigation that we brought early on. And so already that is a win in terms of cabining what they've been able to do this time. That said, this executive order that we received today and some of the prior ones can still do devastating damage to our economy, to our future prosperity, to the ability to advance equality in this country. And I will add one other thought to this that no one has yet mentioned. When you attack our diversity, when you have us divided as Americans, you create a national security threat that a former FBI director has already identified as the greatest security threat to this country. So there's every single interest on the table that is being compromised by these executive orders, which is why we will be bringing litigation to challenge them. There are many ways in which they are constitutionally feeble and frail and unlawful, and that is something that we will continue to pursue as they come out and we read each of these executive orders and how they are mutually reinforcing and attack them individually and collectively because of the damage that they are doing not only to our progress as society, but to the rule of law, most importantly, which undergirds our entire democracy.
Thank you very much, Janae Damon.
Thank you. I concur with everything that Janae said, and it's important to not only never discount the power of litigation connected to movement and collaboration, as Janae said, but also to claim the wins. We believe that's very important as well, because the mission has to be to stop the bad things when we can, to slow down the things that can't be stopped, but also to draw lines in the sand. You know, and one of those lines I want to point out is the blitz of attack that we're seeing right now on civil rights infrastructure isn't only about things like DEIA. It's not only about the attacks we saw in the Supreme Court decision a term or so ago about affirmative action and higher ed admissions. It's also about policies that are designed to promote opportunity, but that are entirely race neutral in their mechanic. They're coming for that as well. We're currently litigating a case that the Students for Fair Admissions group, which sued Harvard and UNC Chapel Hill, has also filed against the University of Texas at Austin. UT Austin eliminated consideration of race in admissions to our chagrin after that Supreme Court decision, yet SFFA continues to pursue that litigation saying, well, you're collecting information about race, so it's problematic. And if I could channel the voice of our student clients from Harvard and UNC Chapel Hill, they would say, pretending that race doesn't matter, that our race doesn't matter, does not make it so, right? And so that's about student perspective, but also we also have to say that collecting information about race in the process is not tantamount to discrimination. Their political project is trying to push us not just into a corner, but push us off the map altogether. So we have to draw that line in the sand. One of the most recent things going back to the federal government in the executive order is a rescission of Executive Order 11246, which goes back to the Johnson administration. And this, of course, creates an affirmative obligation to ensure non-discrimination, right? Even notwithstanding that rescission, we don't believe that fundamentally changes the law, but it's those federal agencies and also the contractors who have this money, these contracts, who have to be put on notice. We know they feel like they're in a vice grip. We know they're in a pickle, but we have to hold them to the highest standards. So I think we have to think in parallel tracks about both what the federal government is doing or not doing, but also what the private sector is doing or not doing. So we have to really think on both tracks in terms of potential advocacy.
So thank you very much. I know this is a little dangerous. We got about 6 or 7 minutes to go. I got a short close I want to share. Anyone pressing to be heard further? Anyone pressing to be heard further on any issue? We have a lot more work to do. This, for the benefit of those who are watching, is just the beginning of what I hope is going to be our effort to build and even expand this coalition around this work. Alfonso.
I'll be very brief. Something that we are often dealing with, Samantha Tweedy deals with it often as well, is this misunderstanding in corporate circles that the law has changed. The law has not changed. The affirmative action decision that was issued by the U.S. Supreme Court is limited to education. It does not apply to employment. It does not apply to contracting. And I think that's incredibly important because in this moment, when executive orders are being issued, those executive orders do not supersede the Constitution. They do not supersede statutes. And so corporate leaders need to understand, yes, I understand there may be some fear, but also let's appreciate that the law has not changed. And that's important for corporate leaders to understand today and as we move into the future.
Point extremely well made. Anyone else? Fatima. Oh, and then Brenda. Yeah, I'm sorry.
So if I could just build off that, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that says you cannot discriminate in employment based on race, based on sex, based on national origin, none of their executive orders can get rid of that.
Yeah.
And so if they are inviting companies to engage in discrimination, if Mark Zuckerberg is out there saying his desire is to have a more masculine energy in his workplace, I take that masculine energy conversation to be a request for more misogyny in that workplace. Facebook, Meta's obligations not to discriminate, they continue. And our civil rights enforcement agencies, their mission and mandate continues to be addressing discrimination as well. So nothing they have done in an executive action can or should change that. And companies that are misled in believing that it is open season and they should engage in whatever conduct that they want to engage in will find themselves facing the private bar around this table and beyond who will have something to say about that.
Point well made, Brenda.
I just wanted to add that I think we've got to pay close attention to mergers and how those mergers are going to affect our communities, and specifically in media. And Skydance and Paramount are trying to merge right now, so that's one of the focus areas that we're looking towards right now.
Yeah, Siobhan, go ahead.
Very quickly, I want to deal with the misnomer of merit. That communities of color, communities that are diverse, do not lack merit. And I want to be sure that we consistently tell this message across the country. There has been a connection between DEI and limitations on a person's ability to perform. It is a misnomer, it is false, and this table should let you know we're doing just fine.
Yeah, and I will just add this, and at the risk of showing how long I've been around, this rings so much like the debate around Baki. The debate around Baki. I was a student activist in those days, and I remember coming to Howard University for a massive student protest against the Baki decision. I remember the Student Center was under construction, and we held the rally right there on the yard at Harvard. At Howard, we had students from all over the country who were there protesting that, and the same arguments about merit, the same arguments about preference, the same arguments. These arguments have been dusted off, taken out of the closet, and not even reframed, just re-expressed and re-exposed. We have to empower our leadership, our communities, and our community leaders about how to best talk about these issues. This is why this fact sheet, which has been made available to all of you and will be made available on our webpage, is important. We've sought to frame this in some frequently asked questions so that folks can understand when they hear these media arguments how to respond in a most effective way. So in the interest of time, a few things. Let me close. What are some steps that are on the table for us? Number one, to engage with congressional leaders. My recommendation is that we write the members of Congress jointly and we express to them our concerns and to seek and demand their support in protecting diversity, equity, and inclusion. We should go on the record collectively with that. Number two, we must sharpen an effort, an outreach campaign to engage with leaders in the corporate sector. By the very same token, what I have heard is a mixed bag. People who've said to me privately, I remain committed, but I don't want to put my head up, but I remain committed. Secondly, a group of folks who seem as though they're trying to have it a little bit both ways. And then the third group are those that have retreated and they're running from phone calls, emails, and requests for conversation. That's what we're faced with, but we need to engage because our voices and the power of our collective, we cannot let anyone say, we don't know where you stand, we don't understand the intensity of your conviction. That's super important. As you've heard, litigation options are on the table. And I'm confident that for all of the organizations that litigate, and we serve as a plaintiff in litigation on a selective basis, that we will pursue every avenue within state and federal courts to confront this movement as a part of our massive resistance effort. We must explore how to best leverage our consumer power. This is an important conversation. It is a conversation that requires thought, consideration, and consensus building, but when we have over $5 trillion in consumer power, and I'll just tell you this, you know, black folks, we over-index in a lot of items. My Jeopardy question is, do you know what item we over-index in? What consumer product we over-index the most? A, B, C, 1, 2, 3 is called grits, right? So we over-index in a lot of consumer products, the same for the Latino, Asian, and other communities around this table. We must educate and inform. I've heard from the Divine Nine, I've heard from ministers, I've heard from activists, I've heard from chief diversity officers, I've heard from people in the academy, all who want to engage. We have a lot of work to do to try to assemble and communicate so that at least we're all sharing information, but we're a moment where people need to act. People need to act. The civil rights movement, contrary to the way historians sometimes advertise it, was not a movement where Dr. King got in a room and created a strategic plan. Go talk to Andrew Young. He'll tell you we didn't know what we were doing from week to week, but we were energized by the power of people. We have to realize that we have to build this movement, and it will not be easy, but a movement is what this must be. And it must be broad and it must be diverse. Finally, we'd like to encourage all of us at this table to encourage their followers as well as those who are listening to text diversity to 52886. We want to build, through a Demand Diversity pledge, a strong record of individuals and organizations who are prepared to go on the record in support of diversity. And we need to reach out broadly and consistently. This is going to take a lot of work, but I'm grateful for all of you for coming today on short notice. For some who wanted to be at the table, there will be other opportunities. You can imagine that there were a number of organizational leaders who wanted to be here when they heard about this, when they found out about this. I just want to commit, if you all are committed, to do more of this. It does not have to just be in Washington, D.C. We need to figure out how we go out to communities. We go into the cities, into the highways and the byways of the country to bring this conversation. And I'm committed, we're committed to working with you to try to organize some of that work and work together. It doesn't prevent us from operating in our own lane, swimming in our own stream, doing what we know we do best. That's not the point here. The point here is to bring us into some community so that we can work together. So let us send a message today. We are not going back. Let us send a message today that we will be the principled massive resistance to this assault. We owe it to our ancestors, and we owe it to our children. So with that, again, give yourselves a hand. We are going to give ourselves a hand for our energy. We're going to give our hand for our commitment, and we're going to give ourselves a hand because our community demanded and asked us to start this conversation. Today is a start, and that's it. So with that, this Demand Diversity Roundtable stands adjourned. Thank you very much. Thank you. We got more to do.